Okay. All right, we all here this evening? Those of us that are here? Hello?
Yep, yep.
Yep, we're here.
Now listen now, I said this yesterday and I'm about to remind you again that I need to have feedback to know that you're there. And I've asked,
Call and response.
thank you,
We're,
thank you.
we're here and ready.
That's right.
Yeah, I think we
And
just
as I
need
said
a minute to come off mute when you ask for a response.
first, to let me know that you're there, you're breathing, you're alive, you're well, you're in a healthy state of mind, in a healthy space. I need to know all these things.
I think we just need a minute to come off of mute in order to respond.
Oh, that what it was? Did I mute you or did you mute yourself?
Well, I got a lot of background noise. I normally mute myself until I'm ready to talk. And it looks like everyone
okay, all right.
right now. So yeah, if you could just give us a minute to respond, because everyone stays, it looks like everyone stays on mute.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay, okay. So let's have a recap of yesterday's conversation and discussion around the Black movement in this cooperative space that we all are moving into. Were any real telling lessons or facts that resonated with you from yesterday's discussion about the history of the Black movement in around cooperatives?
I definitely feel like Julian did a good job explaining the structures to me. And I think just learning the history a little bit more showed me the connection to it being more than an economic system, but a movement was my feeling. And so that was really big for me to come and understand that.
Okay.
For me, it was the African American involvement. I did not know it went so far back in history.
Yeah.
I mentioned it yesterday, but the thing that stood out to me the most was when these groups were doing this type of work, at what periods in our history. It was always at a shift in time. There was indentured servitude during slavery, pre-civil, post-Jim Crow, those eras in time where we had just transitioned or about to transition or something like that, where we were working with one another in this new structure that we fought for. And I see that is the same type of time we're in now.
Ooh. Profound. Profound. All doing economic strike. All doing economic strike. Yes. Well, certainly we were able to see that our forefathers and foremothers were very ethical around the work they did. They worked at building sustainability around the businesses that they were engaged in. And most importantly, there was a philosophy around shared ownership and shared economic participation. And so those things were values that certainly still resonate today. I do want to share an article with you that sort of sets some of this groundwork for our discussion this evening around governance. And so this article was published by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And they're a think tank out there at Stanford University, and they publish a lot of work around nonprofits, philanthropic organizations. And so they just published this article called The 4 Principles of Purpose-Driven Board Leadership. Let me repeat that title to you again. The 4 Principles of Purpose-Driven Board Leadership. And so they looked at 4 principles that they say through their research that have informed them about nonprofit organizations. And particularly the leadership. It's, they say that and I'm assuming again that they're looking at much larger nonprofits, but they point out four things before they move into this discussion on principles that most nonprofits are preoccupied with fundraising above anything else. Secondly, that they disconnect from the communities and people that they serve. Thirdly, that they're ill-informed about the ecosystems in which their organizations operate. And fourthly, they lack in racial and ethnic diversity. And so this is a response to a study that they did where they pulled out these four characteristics of what they see in the nonprofit hierarchy in terms of how they establish themselves. So this term, purpose-driven leadership, does it resonate with any of you? Have you heard that term before, purpose-driven leadership? Because when I read this article, I thought about the book Purpose-Driven Church. And so in that book, when they talk about the purpose-driven church, there was a concentric zone approach to how you bring people into the heart of an organization. That if you can think of it in terms of a theater, if you visualize yourself in the theater, where you have a balcony seating, the mezzanine, the lower level, and then of course the orchestra seating. So his thinking about the purpose-driven church was that when you bring people in, they're almost like on the fringes of the organization. They're on the fringes. But the more you engage them, the closer they come and get to the balcony. But there's a process that moves them along this journey. And so as you're building your organization, think of how you're going to be engaging people at the onset. How are you going to bring them from being interested to being involved? And that's a big iota to sort of climb, to being interested to being involved. Because people it's like window shopping. They peek inside the window and they like what they see, but may not want to buy it or cannot afford to buy it. But what it's saying that as you build your organizations, you want to create the pathway to bring people from the outer to the center core of the work of what you're trying to do. So in the purpose-driven leadership here, as it speaks to this particular article, it talks about purpose before organization, prioritizing the organization's purpose versus the organization itself. That should resonate. I think I was trying to quote a Mr. Spock a quote yesterday from Star Trek, and I got it kind of jumbled up, but he said the wishes of the many outweigh the wishes of the few. So what he was saying in that little quote was that the benefits should come to the many of us, as opposed to a few of us. And if we look at it in economic terms, where we are in this country, where 1% of the population owns 99% of the wealth, we see how those dynamics play out even here in this country when they talk about economics. So they talk about the purpose before organization, prioritizing the organization's purpose versus the organization itself. Secondly, respect for the ecosystem. I talked yesterday a lot about ecosystem. And so he said, respect for ecosystem, acknowledging that the organization's actions can positively or negatively impact its surroundings ecosystem, and a commitment to being a respectful and responsible ecosystem player. That means that you give onus to everyone, regardless of how large they may be or what they may bring to the table. You hold everyone in importance and value, having respect. And so I know that many of us, remember our childhood growing up and our parents taught us that basic lesson about respecting everyone by saying thank you and please. And I have a call here that I'm going to have to put out on hold. Pardon me 1 second, I'm sorry. Hello, Angela? Hello? Hello?
Hey Reggie, what's going on, man?
Yeah, okay. All right, let me get that out the way. Somebody's trying to find me. Okay, let me.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Hold on, wait a minute.
Okay.
I'm down like out in the field.
Reggie.
Good to actually see you.
Reggie,
No,
Reggie.
we did our clinic. Sorry.
Reggie, this is inappropriate.
No, so I was just
No, this is inappropriate, Reggie.
That was my fault, Ryan. I had said hi to Reggie while you were on your call. So that's my fault.
Oh, no, Julian, come on. All right. So anyway, so the respect for the ecosystem. The third item was equity mindset.
Huh? What's my name? Reggie.
Reggie.
Yes.
Julian, that's still you?
No, Reggie, can you mute yourself? Reggie.
Y'all stay cool out here.
I thought I was on mute.
Ordering food, so-
The host
No,
can
you're
mute
still
him.
off mute.
The host can mute him.
He did it.
I will have to deal with that later. Equity mindset, committing to advancing equitable outcomes and avoiding the ways in which the organization's strategies and work may reinforce systematic inequities. Having an equity mindset. And so you want to promote equitable outcomes. But you can be on a pathway of wanting to advance equitable outcomes, but yet be supporting systematic inequities. And that shows up when somebody said, I got mine, and you got to get yours. Not knowing how and whether you have the ability or not to get it, but I got mine. And I remember hearing that so often as a kid growing up in school. And he told me, I got mine, you got yours to get. Okay. I learned that lesson very much so as I grew older, what they were telling me.
What kind of snacks do we have?
Is that Reggie again?
He has to get something very.
Is that Reggie again?
Very specific.
Reggie, you unmuted yourself. Ron, you have control. You can also
I
mute
do.
him.
I'm exercising my little finger now. Yep, I'm doing. Reggie is now gone. Okay. So the last one was authorized voice and power. Recognizing that organizational power and voice must be authorized by those impacted by the organizational work. And so I talked yesterday about one of the things about cooperatives is that they're autonomous and that they're independent. And they're not to be controlled by anyone other than the members of the cooperatives. And so this principle, this last principle of this article speaks just exactly to that. So we're going to get started on this evening's session around governance, and let me share my screen.
One question, Ron.
Yes, go
Will
ahead.
you somehow share those, what you just read, the 4 principles? Will you somehow
Yes,
share that with us?
I put together some articles to send out to you for additional readings, and this is one of them. There were 2 I promised last night, the Ella Baker papers, as well as the study that was done by W.B. Du Bois, which I'll be sending out to you as well. So as soon as Michelle gets back on it Monday, I'll be back a little better organized. So today was her last day. So let's talk about governance. Does anyone want to pin a definition to what you think governance is? How does it apply to the work that you're doing now in your own organization? Is there a governance structure in place?
The governance is basically who will be overseeing what pieces of work. It's a co-op, but it's still a business that has to be run.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, keep that thought before you. So what we're going to cover this evening is why governance matters. We're going to take a look at the role of board and directors. We're going to look at examine the characteristics of effective board leadership, barriers to effective governance, and trends in Maryland co-op governance. And so I'll trend in a little bit around Maryland governance as well as some governance around the District of Columbia. Unfortunately, I'm not that versed in some of the other areas, particularly Michigan, in terms of how governance goes there as it relates to cooperatives. Why does governance matter? Well, we've seen over the years major scandals that have occurred in this country. And a lot of it because there was no controls in place of how decisions were going to be made. And so they have failed governance inside of many of these places. I mean, going back to the early 90s and 80s around Enron and Lehman Brothers. And we still see some of this showing up even today with some of our past businesses that have been operating out of the context of being sound and prudent about how they do business. So why does governance matter? Well, effective governance leads to effective performance. If you're a good, if your company or your business is being governed properly, you can rest assured most likely you're going to have a high level of performance and outcomes. Because governance is the basic foundation of any business in terms of how it operates and grows and proceeds along its journey. Why does it matter to co-ops? Well, co-op boards must be accountable to your members. As I said yesterday, one person, one vote, a democratic process. No matter how long you've been in it, how you came into it, all equals out to one person, one vote. And with the co-op, that is just the bottom line. We all share in this process called governance and decision-making. The roles of the board and directors are very important in governance because, board directors, they bring leadership, they're the stewards of the organization and its funds. They make sure that they monitor, the fiscal sustainability of the organization. And of course, all the reporting that may be due from funders or other lenders they make sure that they take care of that. So the board, as you're now forming your own cooperatives and you're taking on leadership roles, these are 4 areas that you have to focus in. Your leadership, because as you grow as a leader, so do you grow the organization. Your stewardship of the organization. No one is bigger than the organization, and everything ties back into having a healthy organization. And of course, making sure that you're monitoring everything that goes on, because at the height of this, and Julian being an attorney, he can share this with you, you become responsible. There's no excuse for saying that I did not know, because as a director, you should know, and you should engage yourself in knowing how the business is operating, who's responsible for what, and of course, the end result of that is that you're able to report out at some point that the business is satisfactory and operating properly. There's a difference between boards and directors, particularly, and sometimes they may be interchangeable depending how you structure your organization. And so you'll get a lot more of this from the attorneys when they come into the room to talk about the legal structure. But the directors, they manage or supervise the management of the business. Many times we see directors in producer cooperatives, grocery stores, retail spaces where the director is managing the management of the business or the affairs of the cooperatives. Little comical thing here. I'm aware that some of us take our leadership role a bit more seriously than others. Well, I do. I'm that kind of person. But I'm asked to take on a fiduciary role in an organization. I take it very seriously because first of all, my credibility is being attached to the organization. And if something unfairly or inappropriately is being done, then I know that I'm accountable to that. So I want to know what's going on all the time regarding reporting, who's doing what, the monitoring. Yes, because I don't want to be held accountable and stand face that I did not know. So the board, what is to be achieved and for whom at what cost? And of course, the management, they want to see just how it's going to be achieved. So management, separating management from board. And I was told a story sometime last year about a food co-op that wanted to move its location. And so the board had voted to move. But the management didn't think it was a physically sound opportunity for the organization to move. So it created some discourse between that board and the management. Eventually, they did work it out, their differences, and the organization did wind up moving into a new space and doing some other things there in the grocery store to create new revenue opportunities. Who owns the vision, the mission, and the values? The board does. Your vision is what's driving the organization, what's going to grow the organization. And of course, the underpinning of that is the mission to which you value and do your work. Management is only concerned about the strategic efforts. They're not so much concerned about the vision or the mission, but the manager is going to drive the work and the efforts of the organization. And so this brings to a question of when do you separate out your role as a manager versus that of a board person? Have any of you ever been placed in that situation where you've had to delineate your roles? Do all of you have right now, have you sit down and thought about, this goes back to my question yesterday, about have you met before? Have you thought about your mission and your vision statements? Do you have them? Okay. So the vision statement is going to tell you what we want to be in the future. That's your long-term lookout. That's your long-term lookout where you want to be at a certain point in time. Your mission is going to tell you who you exist, why you exist, and whom you exist for. And your values are your essential beliefs that guides everything that you do inside of your organization, your values. So your mission, your vision, and your values are critical components to the foundation of your business. And if anything that we've learned, over these last 4 years, how critically important vision, mission, and values are. And we're still experiencing that now within the framework of our own country. Mission, vision, and values. So as you sit down over the next weeks and sit down with your inner core group to hash out these issues around what is our vision for this organization? What is our mission for the organization? And what kind of values are we trying to instill that's going to allow us to grow exponentially in the right way, as opposed in a way that may be non-beneficial to the work that we're trying to do. Of course, I stated earlier about the board of directors and one of the roles it is to sit down and look at the strategic growth of the organization, because that vision, mission, and the values are part of that. And so, has anyone ever gone through a strategic planning process before?
I'm currently involved in my first one.
Huh?
I'm currently involved in my first one in one of the board positions I'm on.
Okay.
And I have.
You as well? Okay. A very in-depth, tedious process. Yeah. It has you thinking a lot about internally where we at and what's going to take to get us where we want to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road. You know, nonprofits for the most part do what we call strategic planning. Businesses usually put together a business plan, but they all come together to make the same objective in terms of giving you the foundation for growth and self-examination, which is critical, because you can surely think that you're doing something properly at a certain point in time. You may be, but circumstances and conditions change. And so you have to be able to evolve with the changing environment that you're in. No one expected COVID-19 in 2020. No one expected it. And no one expected at the depth that it impacted communities around the world. So folks now have had to go back and retool, recalibrate. Some businesses did not come back. Statistically, I think we lost over 400,000 Black businesses in a year of the pandemic. And so if you're going back now into this world of work now and business, you're doing things a little differently now than you did previously. So the strategic plan is about reviewing, you review it, you approve it. This is the board's role. You understand the challenges and the assumptions. You understand the critical success factors. You ensure sufficient due diligence. Due diligence, that means that, again, going back to what you should know and ensure your level of accountability to know, because you are going to be held to a standard of knowledge and accountability. They don't come after the employees, they go after the boards of organizations when they're the ones who are not operating efficiently and effectively. Is the plan realistic or achievable? You know, I think I hear this all the time when persons tell me they're going to start a nonprofit and immediately think they're going to get grant money. They just think because I start a nonprofit, I'm gonna get some grant money. Or they start nonprofits thinking it's their business. I own a nonprofit. I've heard that so many times in my lifetime. I've heard that I own a nonprofit. Not understanding that the structure is a corporate structure with a board. So, how will success be measured? You know, there's a term we call SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so you have to be able to look at that through that lens when you're looking at developing your strategic plan. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my opportunities? And what are my threats? And for those of you who are looking at going into cooperatives and developing cooperatives where you're going to be producers and having product, you want to know what your competition is, because you're in a marketplace of competition, of competitors. I think there are very few unique businesses that someone can say they have monopolized to themselves. But when you're out there in the business world and you're dealing with competition, you want to know who your competitors are. Some key success factors for an effective board of directors is understanding leadership, unquestioned legitimacy and effective power, enlightened definition of function, role, and responsibilities, outstanding competence, a supportive functional culture, and effective management of function, structure, and process. Yeah. And here's the director's competency map. And if you look at it, you know, look at all the interconnected processes to being a good director. You want a director, if you're going to be a director, you want to certainly want to know the business that you're in. You want to know how to deal with people. Leadership is important. Boardroom practice. So you got to be able to operate in all of these areas effectively if you're going to be an asset to the organization. Now, if you're not intending to be an asset to the organization and you just want to wear the title, then some of these things may not matter. But I rest assured, I would probably tell you that that without that, you're going to find that the individuals, the organization rather, is going to falter at some point in time because of your incompetency as a director. Okay. Such as there are upsides to governance, there are also barriers to governance as well. You know, one of the good things about governance is having a good board of directors who understand the duties and responsibilities of the directorship and how they guide an organization. But there are also some barriers when you have ineffective leadership. And we've seen the results of ineffective leadership for 4 years consistently in our country, what ineffective leadership can be. A representational mindset, not representing everyone, but you representing a sector of a group or of people. The lack of sustained commitment to vision, mission, and values. There's a term that we use in this sector of nonprofit called mission creep. And you can have a real strong mission at the beginning of your early years. And if you don't take time to go back and revisit your mission, having those real tough conversations, you know, you can easily sway away from what you were intended to do at the beginning, and when you find yourself in later years. It's called mission creep. Some creep faster than others. If you think of it in terms of being on a beach and the waves coming in washing the sand away, it's simply just what happens. It erodes away the mission. And of course, you know, you end up not recognizing who you are and what you're being charged to do. An unclear definition of your function, roles, and responsibilities. And so when you start putting together your governance documents, particularly your bylaws, I would recommend highly that you spend time not rushing through these documents. You want to be clear on what you're going to be asking of individuals and expecting of them. Because that document, those bylaws are going to be the documents that are going to guide your membership, and it's going to guide the values of your organization. So don't take that document lightly. And again, I mentioned earlier about this role between management and board. You know, even if you, and I would go even further to say between the board and an executive director, which is still a manager. You want to have a team approach to how you're doing your work collectively together. You don't want to find yourselves on different pages and in conflict and not being able to take and get the bigger picture done around the work that you're doing. So that's real important. And a lack of mutual trust within board and between board and board management and the management is, again, is another one of those things that can certainly impact the organization and neutralize what you're trying to do. Trust is so hard to build up and so quickly can go away because it's very personalized. How you treat me, how you look at me. And if I give you my trust, and that betrayal may show up, as it may sometimes be, it gets personalized. It gets personalized, and the worst thing to have in an organization is that corrosiveness that comes with the lack of trust. It's this is like a cancer. It eats internally at the organization. Okay. So again, some of the barriers to effective governance are the imbalance of skills and competencies. You want to be able to have people who, if not just as knowledgeable as you, more knowledgeable than yourself. And if you look at the work that many industrialists and business person have adopted, they always surround themselves with people smarter than them. That's not by coincidence. They surround people themselves with people who are smarter than them, who are more knowledgeable, because they know they have one set of skill sets, but they need other people with other skill sets to help to lead the work that they're trying to get done. I always tell the story of Sam Walton, you know, the owner and the founder of Walmart. He was illiterate and couldn't read, but he was a billionaire. He developed a billion-dollar business. How did he do that? By hiring the people that he knew had the talent and skill sets to grow his business. He had the vision, but he needed those technocrats with the skill sets to help grow. So maybe that is a lesson for all of us, that you don't have to know it all to be it all. Maybe just have the vision. And so if you have the vision, step out of the way and let those who know how to do it do it. And just be the visionary of the organization. That was Steve Jobs' role with Apple. Steve Jobs was a visionary. He didn't know how to create all those gadgets, but he had the vision of how it should look and how it should function and how it would relate to everyday lives of people. So he was able to take his vision and share it with others who took his vision and applied the technology to it. And so we have the Apple Watch, Apple computer, and so on, so on, so on, so on. So, burnout. Ooh, goodness, that's a big one. Ooh, burnout is a real big one. You know, you can have the passion, and passion is really great. I love passion. I love passionate people. You know, I love passionate people. But you got to be very mindful of how you deploy your passion. Because you can be the one person who's pulling the whole organization, and before you know it, you look around, there's nobody else there but you. And we found this out in 2020 and we heard this term so much about self-care. You want to be able to put yourself in a place of self-care, but you don't burn yourself out. And that's why utilizing the skill sets of your team is real important in this process. And yes, there will be turnover. You don't get around it. There are going to be turnover, but you want to be able to have at least some turnover that you can control and manage. You don't want the entire board to turn over and leave all at the same time without having some intellectual knowledge stay in place. So when you start looking at developing your boards and developing your legal documents, make sure that you don't have everybody transitioning off the board at the same time. You want to stagger some of that departure around your board, so that there'll be intellectual knowledge there when new members come on board, and that can help guide them and mold them along the way. And the last item here is just lack of succession planning, which can go back to burnout, it can go back to turnover. It sort of has a intertwining thread to all of this, because the fact is you have to plan for succession, departure. Yes, there's a rarity, you have people there 20, 30 years doing the work. But in the world that we live in now, which is very transitory, people are moving along spaces a little differently now than they did previously. And that's not a bad thing, because you should be able to utilize the time people give you when they say, I'm volunteering time, I want to help out. Don't expect it to be a long-term partnership in the sense that they're gonna stay there, because you want to replenish your organization with new thinkers, new thought. As you used to say, new blood. Right. Okay. Trends in co-op governance. Well, again, we're seeing a lot of this now. The Dodd-Frank law that was passed several years ago talked about accountability of nonprofits and as well as for-profit businesses. You want to always have a standard of accountability among your board and your committee, and making sure that you have those written down. In addition, you want to be able to have an evaluation measure. How are you evaluating your board? They just come on board and just stay there, or do you at some point in time evaluate their progress, their effectiveness? One of the things we didn't talk about, here around boards is that particularly boards, board members should be able to bring their resources into the organization. If you have an organization of board members who are not bringing resources into the door of your organization, then you need to reconsider those persons as board members. And I know we all bring different resources into the space, but it's important to encourage your board members to support the needs of the organization. I don't think we do this enough either. Surveying and having internal focus groups. My organization, we're going away next weekend. We're going to do 2 planning sessions this year. We had one last year during COVID, and we're doing 2 this year. We're going to do one in the summer, and we're going to do one in the fall. And both have different purposes. Because we transitioned some new board members on board, we want to make sure now that we can really solidify their tenure and their knowledge of what the organization mission and vision is going forward. And so this has been a year where we've just had a lot of good things happen, but we've accelerated. So now we got to slow back down and be very meticulous about making sure that these new members are vested in the knowledge that they need to be effective board members. And so, take time to look at ways that you can measure your board members' knowledge, how you can survey them, and it's certainly, occasionally try to build in your planning and process is some small times where you can have these focused conversations with your board members about where you are and where you're trying to go to, what the needs may be of the organization. Yes. Very, very important. Just some statistics I threw up there for you to look at. The average size of a board is about 9.4 directors. The average is 2.5 women on the board. Average is 10 meetings per year. Most organizations take off the summer, August and July. Average length of service, non-financial co-ops, 7.5 years. Credit unions, usually 9 years. And most directors have a 3-year term, which builds in again this whole thought around succession planning. Again, some of the trends in the co-op governance space: growth, profitability, financial sustainability, HR development, risk management, succession planning, member relations, mergers, market share retention, communication. And there are probably some more that's not even listed here. There's some trends specifically to your market and the business that you're growing. Okay. Here again, some more trends about policy development. I said this, I made this comment yesterday that this work that we're doing around co-op, so I didn't say it, but I might have shared it with one in the conversation, but this work doesn't go on without some kind of advocacy. Policy drives everything, folks. We're having long debates in this country now about policy. How do we address the racial wealth discord? How do we address the wealth divide in this country? Those are real policy questions that we're asking now and that need to get addressed. Succession planning, I've talked about that. Directed recruitment, of course, I talked about that. Share that with you, how important it is to bring in new thinking, new blood, as they say. Accountability, as well as the evaluation through surveys or forums of the board, as well as the director. Three components of a democratic organization are governance, management, and a legal structure. And so again, in a couple of weeks, you'll be introduced to an attorney that will be able to answer a lot of the questions you have asked me around the legal structure. And because my knowledge is very limited, because I'm not an attorney, I prefer to refer you to attorneys. So we're going to have attorneys come in and share their work with us. Oh, Miss Ella Jo Baker shows up again. Here she is. And this is a quote. What she says, I have always thought that what is needed is the development of people who are interested not in being leaders as much as in developing leadership in others. And I know how often I heard that said over the years, leaders develop good leaders. That's the pyramid. Leaders develop good leaders. And again, you know, the governance process could not operate without a legal structure to support it. Your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, and of course your internal policies. So there's a lot of work to be done. And again, I know I said this yesterday that we're going to cover a lot of this very quickly, and so we're going to have to figure out, you know, how to keep you folks engaged to the point that you fully have embraced a lot of this work that needs to go forward. But yes, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your policies, they are the legal documents that provide the framework for your businesses. Okay, democratic framework for the legal structure, money, power, and information. Money, power, and information. Money, how owners come in, how they leave, and how they get, in some cases, maybe some profit benefit out of the proceeds of the co-op. And again, in your legal structure, you may have a profit sharing component to your cooperative, you may not. Power, the rights of owners, the rights of the board, outside investors who may invest in your cooperative business, and what kind of power changes you make in terms of changes. Of course, information is meeting the schedule, notice of meetings, financial performance, and communication. Remember, I said earlier about reporting. You want to put that under information? Reporting, making sure that you are doing the right things. When Mike comes into the room, he's going to talk with you about some other forms of democratic management, like sociocracy, holacracy, some terms I'm not familiar with, So I'm looking forward to his discussion as well, to learn some more about other forms of governance. So again, what is governance? Governance is a system of rules and practices and processes by which companies are directed and controlled. A democratic governance system is designed to delineate and address the issues that are best left to the membership, the board of directors, and the management or other leadership. That's what governance is. Just a simple system of rules and practices by which directs everyone around how they need to operate in terms of being a member of that particular organization or particular business. But it also goes on to say the governance must be accountable to the people it governs. It fosters widespread communication and understanding among members around organizational policy. Here this word comes again, policy. Provides them with a meaningful influence in setting policy and protects the personal rights of members. Here's a diagram that shows you how the sphere of governance operates. The board of, here's your membership, empowering your board of directors, that's empowering management. So who's in control of a cooperative? Does anyone know, can anyone answer me who's actually in control of a cooperative? Is it the membership or the board of directors?
I would think the membership.
That's right, that's right. Always the membership. Always the membership. But again, the membership is going to elect the board of directors because the board of directors come from the membership. And of course, the board of directors hires that management person that they need to do with the operational of the organization going forward. Here we say, again, the membership, the primary decision makers, they patronize the firm because they own it. And as you sit and develop your bylaws, again, it's important that you empower your membership with decision-making authority because membership matters in a cooperative. Not the directors, not the management, but the membership. I was privy to watch a movie just recently again on Jimmy Hoffa and the ACLU. And one of the things throughout that his term as head of that union, which he kept emphasizing all the time throughout the movie was membership, membership, membership. And so membership matters very deeply. So again, your board of directors, as I said earlier, are elected by the membership. All right, and their responsibility is to oversee the operations of the business, to make policy decisions on behalf of the business. As again, going back to what we said earlier in a few slides back, to do the reporting, hold that mission and vision and value in high esteem. And of course, management is just there to ensure the effective operations of the business. That's what management does. They don't set policy.
May I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
And so as I'm listening to the presentation, I'm very excited to have membership so that they can elect a board of directors. But I'm curious about like what happens before that and how before we are at the point where we have members and before we have like an election process, who or how can we set ourselves up to be making decisions together as a group? Is it a different entity title? Like I've heard steering committees, or, you know, is that what we're talking about? Like when we're in pre-phase and not quite here yet, are the ways that you structure it the same? Are they different? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
All right. If you can allow me, let me open that question up to everyone in the window. She's asking the question in terms of the pre-structure that leads to empowering membership. Now, you couldn't have a steering committee that's exploratory. And that means that the steering committee is a temporary way of growing knowledge and processes for the organization. And at some point, the steering committee will dissolve itself or maybe reform itself into another entity that has more empowered authority than a steering committee. But a steering committee, for the most part, people do steering committees to help start to formalize the foundation of the organization. That's what they do with steering committees. So we can be a steering committee, we're exploring, we're investigating, we're coming up with ideas, we're drafting documents, and so we're leading the work. But eventually the work that we're doing as a steering committee has to be passed on to authoritative empowered body that now takes and approves it and incorporates it legally inside the guide the organization. And so that piece that you're speaking of really goes back to the bylaws. And that's where a steering committee can sit and do some homework in terms of looking at different bylaws or different organizations, crafting something that's suitable to this particular group that it's working with. I'm gonna point my finger to Julie. Yeah. So, Julie, you're working with some new groups. You're looking to start up groups that may take that route of having a steering committee lead their work without jumping head into getting bylaws done and all those legal documents.
So I've seen a couple paths. So I think one is in New York, at least, a lot of folks form as LLCs, which are managed by the members anyway, and so there's no formal board. But yeah, I think in the initial stages, you functionally just have a couple folks who are just kind of holding the work, and then, you know, most times they're called like a steering committee or just like a coordinating circle or something to that effect. But when you are ready, you know, those folks typically transition into those roles. But having some stuff around like accountability, having some stuff around voting, even before you do bylaws, is probably helpful just to, you know, just to have some kind of sense of, I mean, like the values, mission, vision piece, I think is also important, but even before you do bylaws.
You know, there have been some groups that have operated as a steering committee for several years before they even incorporated, because they wanted to work out a lot of different processes for documents. And then, as I said yesterday, they wanted to build a solidarity among the group. And so they didn't want to run too fast, as I said, about accelerating. They didn't want to accelerate too fast and miss some learning lessons along the way.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, and I think Parag is coming in, right? To the lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, Parag, who's great and has been doing this work longer than me. One thing to be careful about though is that if you're like operating and you're doing contracts and you're getting money, you gotta, if you don't have anything formally incorporated or organized, you gotta just be extra careful around like liability, around like commingling your personal funds with your business's funds. And so I think, if you're kind of working all that stuff out before you start actually operating and bringing in money, that's a little bit safer. But I mean, I think obviously people operate before they incorporate. It's just a calculated risk. Just people got to just know what those risks are, and you either take them or you don't.
Mhm.
That's helpful. Thank you both. One piece of information that I didn't necessarily share is that kind of like some of the folks that were saying yesterday, we are forming within a nonprofit. And so that has just been kind of like a challenge around how do we, because the nonprofit itself has a board of directors, but that board of directors is not actually the people who are making decisions or coordinating around what we are planning to do. And so kind of my curiosity has been, how do you structure or how do you call the thing? And at what point should we be taking these conversations to the larger board for some of the like changing of the business designation conversations that would happen, eventually. So that the piece about the LLC was helpful. That's definitely something that has been a question that's been circulating for a little minute around if we should form a LLC. And so I had really no concept of forming an LLC as a co-op. So I definitely want to learn more about that. But my curiosity is it's an organic project, so to speak, but it's under this umbrella of a nonprofit organization. And so there may or may not be, I don't know, I could be like self-censoring and it not actually be a problem, but that's where we're coming from fully.
Well, I only thing I would comment that I say education, knowledge is the key. And so, and I'm probably making an assumption that you not talk to any attorneys at this point in the juncture. And so, and that could be a very delicate. It seems to be a very delicate scenario that you described. And so, I would certainly, before I make any rash or quick decision, certainly consult an attorney around that, because if this group that you're describing is operating outside of the 503, then it is its own independent um, entity. Now, if it's operating as a part of the 503, which means that is somehow is related to 503 in some way or fashion, maybe it's as a subsidiary or maybe it's a project. I'm not sure. So those are the questions. Certainly, I would write those questions down to ask the attorney when he comes in, because if you're getting support from the organization, then obviously there's some kind of ambivalent relationship going on there. I don't know if they provide you space, materials, access to certain things. I don't know, but if they are, then that would probably, to me, denote some kind of relationship. Mhm. But again, I am not an attorney, and I would succumb and relinquish my uh, thoughts to whatever that attorney would share with us. But yeah, but I would think I would keep that question written down somewhere at the appropriate time so you can get a full and concise answer on it. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Here's just a concentric circle on the key elements of governance. It's a little too small for me to, I guess I could, oh, there we are. Oh, there we are. Can you see it? Did it get any bigger?
Yes, that I
Okay,
can
good.
see that much
Okay.
better.
So we can see some of the things that are involved in the key elements of governance. Purpose. Again, going back to the earlier article I read from Stanford, talking about the purpose-driven organization. This is what I was describing as the theater. So if you look at it as this is the balcony up in the, as we call the nosebleed seats, how do you bring people down into the center of the organization where they're really purpose driven at this point? Here they're just lingering outside, maybe have some interest. But as you begin to grow your organizations, you're going to have to develop a pathway to bring people closer and closer to the point that they here are focused on the purpose of what the organization or cooperative is really about. And that's a process. And in between here and here, there's a lot of things can go on or not go on. So I would certainly suggest that as you look at that process, try to make it amenable to what you're trying to get accomplished. And so question time. Matter of fact, let's not take questions. Let's go ahead at 6:30. Let's come back in the room at 6:45. Everybody let's take a 15-minute break and then we'll come back. All right?
All right, thanks, Ron.
Okay. All right, folks. I hope everybody's returning back to the room and you're taking care of your thirst and other biological needs.
Yes, I'm returned. I've returned.
Okay.
I'm back too.
Well, I wasn't saying that for y'all just to own up. I just wanted you to know that taking care of yourselves is very critical, very self-care. Let's remind ourselves. But Mr. Mike Strode has arrived, and he's going to present the second half of today's session to you. And so I did want to just take a moment just to introduce Mr. Strode. Mike is a writer, a cyclist, and an IT consultant, as well as a facilitator and solidarity economy organizer residing in Southeast Chicago, whose community engagement work has included ride leadership with the Chicago chapter of Red, Bike, and Green. He's an editorial archival oversight of the let me get this right, get my tongue right. I think it's pronounced Fortuna, and co-facilitator of Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group. He is founding coordinator of the Cola Nut Collaborative, a time-based service and skills training platform which promotes time banking throughout Chicago. He also serves as a current board member of the Dill Pickle Food Co-op. My pleasure to introduce Mike Strode to you, who will be taking hold of the second half of our presentation. Welcome to you, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much, Ron. Really appreciate that. And good to be here with you all. So, you know, I want to foreground with one thing. I am not a governance or management expert. And that's an important thing for me to foreground. And it's important for me to foreground because the things that I'm very interested in and the things that I
And then look at me. That is not the same man.
that divine.
Julia, mute. Sorry, but you look like T.I. I'm sorry.
All right, I'll receive that. Into the South, Kansas City, Louisiana. Okay, so so the things that I am very interested in and I've developed an expertise in is facilitation. So that's where I really kind of ground my discussion and my explanation. And because I'm grounded in facilitation, perhaps I have a bias to say that like it's a really critical part of how we do governance and how we do management. And what I hope to share tonight is really just some of my personal experience with these two areas, to kind of foreground some of the other presentation that you all have taken in tonight, and maybe just kind of draw that out into both my experience, but also I want to hear your experience, right? I want to hear your feedback. So the first thing that I want to try to do, and see if I can do this in about 20 minutes, is something called an Aurid focused conversation. So if anyone is into facilitation and they've done technology participation, maybe you know about this method, maybe you don't. But if you don't know about it, you're going to learn about it tonight. So the Aurid focused conversation, ORID, is an acronym for objective, reflective, interpretive, and decisional. And it's a conversational, a facilitated conversation that helps to sometimes draw people towards a decision, but taking them through a pathway to that decision that involves them first exploring like what they know about something, reflecting on how they feel about something, interpreting what they've learned from that, and then making a decision in that way. So that's what I want to take you all through, because first I want to hear about your experiences from this earlier part of the training. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of a conversational stack. So I'm just going to rearrange your faces on my screen because Zoom allows me to do that. And then hopefully I'm going to be able to allow you to tell me what your experience has been of this training so far. So let me just put these 4 questions in the chat, and then I'm going to put also the conversation stack in the chat. Yes, and Divine has posted in the chat, the Aurid acronym: objective, reflective, interpretive, decisional. So these are the 4 questions that we are going to tackle. And my random speaking order that I'll offer is okay. So if you are in agreement with that speaking order, I've got Sachi, Leslie, Sienna, Nkechi, Rabia, Julian, Patrick, and Divine for the speaking order. So we'll use this speaking order basically as our virtual circle, and that hopefully that will hold us as we have this conversation. So the first question on this Aurid is, what is one thing that you can recall from the earlier presentation? So what is one thing you can recall from recall from the earlier presentation? And if Sachi can start us off.
Hi, I'm Sasha.
Sasha.
And I mean, so the first half of this presentation was a lot to take in. And I think kind of my main takeaway is about our governance being about how we behave with one another, but also just like all of the different steps to getting there. So I really appreciated it being from like the very basic of like the mission and the vision, just as much as like being in the values and how being clear on those pieces can support us in getting to like the bylaws, the electing the board of directors. Another thing that just kind of like touched me personally was how governance, just like everything else, can encourage our relationships. And so what it made me think about was like, how can we, as we are getting people, as I think Ron said, going from interested to participating, or like interested to active, incorporated, or something like that. As we think about that, like as a group, how do we just kind of an action item around like, how do we bring folks in to establish those values, as we're constantly bringing new people in, you know, like getting to a group of people that we can say, oh, well, this group of people is the perfect group of people to say these are what our whole community values are. So that's just kind of a takeaway of what I heard, but also what it made me think about.
Okay, question over to Leslie and then Sienna.
Mine was just the importance of governance and the entire structure of it, and then also the importance of putting members first and listening to the members and basing your goals and visions off of what they want.
Something that I learned was definitely like the role of a board and how that really functions, because it's not just a group of people that make decisions. They each have to bring some kind of resources to the table, and also thinking about like how you're gonna be voting and electing people to the board was also something that I thought was really interesting. And I kind of realized that we really need to finalize or like formalize a sort of voting system within our own group.
Purpose-driven leadership is
Just one pause, and Robbie is
Oh.
Nkechi, then you. Nkechi and then you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not big on details. I was a nerd because I had to take notes. So all of the details are coming at me real fast. So I haven't been able to grasp and hold much of anything. Overall, what I'm getting from the information that I received so far is I'm familiar with a lot of things that have been discussed already. I've participated in some of these steps in another entity already. So it's relieving that so far, nothing is really new to me. The newest piece is how it relates to building a co-op, but the pieces are familiar. That's comforting when you're talking about entering new territory. So I think that's the biggest.
Over to you, Rabia, and then Julian.
Purpose-driven leadership, similar to Nkechi. I'm familiar with most of what has been discussed. So you can have the mission, vision, and values in place, your strategic goals and objectives in place. You can have your board of directors, you can have your bylaws and all of that. But you really need the concept or the aspect of purpose-driven leadership, because it's about getting people buy-in on those things and engaging people in those areas to move forward with the work that needs to be done. That's more challenging than just putting those, in my opinion, it's more challenging than just putting those pieces together, because you're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, one thing that I can recall is the whole idea around leaders being effective when they build other leaders, and how that applies to the context of a co-op. I think that's just a major key.
One thing that I recall and remember and take away is that in this structure, members run everything. Yeah, and I think that's just a quintessential point in orientation that's different from any other model that I've been involved in.
So the thing that comes to my mind based off of everything that has been presented is the whole trust factor, especially in this space of creating Black equity and inclusion. Considering the history of the COINTELPRO program, the whole trust factor when we are bringing together like-minded individuals is something that has to be intentional. And I think that from the lesson, it's important to have a structure to be able to make sure that the type of environment is available and we're able to synthesize when something has been infiltrated. Thank you.
All right, we have peeled the first layer of the onion. We've gotten out the objective. What is one thing that we recall from an earlier presentation? And now we're going to circle back around. And just as a note, these second two layers, the reflective and the interpretive, these are two optional questions. So we'll still go through the same speaking order, but it's certainly optional. If you feel like you don't have input, you can certainly pass. But if you would like to offer input to them, that's the option. And then the final layer that will go to decisional, that's also the one that's going to be, we want everyone to express on that one. So that's going to be a full round. So we'll return back to the speaking order. So the second question on the table is, how do you feel about your current understanding of governance or management? How do you feel after going through that presentation? Back over to Sasha.
I think I feel full. I feel I want to say I feel empowered, but I really just feel my gears churning of how I'm going to integrate kind of the new awareness. I forget who said it, so please forgive me, but about how lots of it is not new, but it's the co-op piece is new. And so that kind of integration of hearing these concepts that I've heard and lived in, but haven't necessarily felt good or felt like spaces that I wanted to occupy or create. And how do I take these very basic tools of just basic people and resource management and translate that to a democratic way? So I really love the slide about like that was specific about that, like how to like democratic organizations and breaking it down with like the money and the people. I forget. I took a screenshot because I was like, I love this slide.
Leslie is dropped, so it's over to Sienna and then Nkechi.
I feel like right now it's very, like this whole presentation has been very oriented towards the more, like not really what I think the people side of it is. It's more like the administration. When I think about that, I think about like processes that are very like root in a way, like manual, and I'm realizing that that's not the reality of it. Like the reality is that like all of these parts are very dynamic and you need to like really bring your vision into every single element of what you're doing. And I'm just like wrapping my head around that.
Okay, Nkechi, Leslie just dropped back in, so I just want to pitch it back to Leslie and then over to you. And so Leslie, we're answering the second question. How do you feel about your current understanding of governance or management?
I have a lot of experience in governance and management over a decade, so I feel very comfortable with my knowledge about governance and management.
Over to Nkechi.
I am steadily learning more and more about governance and management. This is just another opportunity for me to learn about it. I'm comfortable where I am in that learning to understand what's been said here so far. I think what I want to learn more is more of the details. Again, I'm a visionary. So in my vision, all I know I want to do is create something that is not a part of the current structure. That's what I want to do. I know that is my vision. So you give me the details of a co-op, and then how do we pull from that, creating something that is not part of the current structure, that is as separate from it as possible. So I'm still looking at the details that are there in order to come to that vision. So right now, my answers are not going to be detailed. My answers might be a little incomplete because that is just the way I process. Take in, match it up against the knowledge and community I already have, and then voila, produce a product type of thing. Yeah.
I'm comfortable with governance and management at the in a corporate setting. I do not have much experience of that in a community type of a setting or community organization.
Julian and then Patrick.
Yeah, I do a lot of legal work for co-ops, worker co-ops, and so I feel pretty good on governance. I mean, I'm always still learning, but I feel like I have a good foundation for sure. Check.
Yeah, I also feel pretty good about governance and management, just from previous experience and just listening to folks and learning more and be able to overlay that with my past experiences makes me feel very comfortable.
And to Devon.
I think for me, in regards to governance and management, is making sure that in the development of the cooperative structure, that there is a balance of respect and clarity when it comes from the distinction of governance, setting the vision, the direction, and then from the management component of the planning and the implementation.
All right, and so some folks have dropped into the interpretive, already. So it's okay if you had an answer to that already. But we're in the what is something you want to learn more about in these two areas, recognizing that folks have a wide range of experiences with governance and management. Perhaps it's something that's specific to co-ops. But what is something you want to learn more about in these two areas? And again, this is another one of the optional feedback inputs. So if you're still kind of churning on that, feel free to pass. Over to Sasha.
I'm churning, but that's because I want to learn a lot. I think the first thing is how do we, where we're sitting, like having a buying club that's nestled under a nonprofit, and the nonprofit has its own culture. Like I see governance as kind of how do you officialize the culture of the space, and so that's my kind of question. That's what I want to know more of, but maybe not know more of, or just put more into practice of being intentional about our values as we create culture within the buying club.
Over to Leslie and then Sienna. So it's over to you, Leslie, and then to Sienna.
Sorry, it was taking me forever to unmute. I don't have a set thing that I'm looking to learn. I'm just trying to soak it all in, I think, like everybody else. So I'm open to just learning more about cooperatives as a whole, and more about the structure. And I think more about the employees is probably a bigger part because my role has always been like on the board of directors, but not necessarily overseeing employees. So I'm hoping to learn more when we get to that part.
I want to learn more about the balance in it, because I remember we were talking about like burnout and the different things that can happen and go wrong in a board of directors, and how, you know, you can kind of manage that. So yeah, mainly balance.
Over to Kenchi has dropped, so over to Rabia and then Julian.
Hey, Robbie, it's on you.
My comments were mirrored Leslie's. And it would be interesting to see how different, or if there's a tailored approach to this topic of governance and management, going from corporate to community or co-op.
Yeah, I think for me, although like I'm familiar with both the concepts, in terms of the co-op, I really want to learn how to better arrange things so that we're keeping those two things distinct. I feel like sometimes those things are kind of like intermingling in the same conversations. And so just like better processes for how to, particularly with a small co-op with like two people, you know, how to bifurcate those roles a bit better when people are sharing both.
Over to Patrick and then Devon.
Yeah, I think in terms of what I want to learn in terms of governance and management is just more tactics and best practices, because I think just to see fundamentally what that looks like. I think a lot of my governance and management practice has been during change management, and I fundamentally come in with a view that's different than everyone else in the organization, and I have to socialize it and try to change the organization. So I want to see and understand how this inclusive process can potentially be powerful, or what are the tactics when people disagree, but you want to champion the best idea and you have to socialize what you think is probably, the best idea.
For me, I want to be able to synthesize, get clarity on the membership building component of a cooperative and what that structure looks like and how to effectively engage membership buy-in.
All right, final layer of the onion. You're at the Aurid, at the end of the Aurid. So the decisional. What is one action that you will take from this point to build upon today's learning? Sasha, if you will kick us off again.
Connect back with my team and do the first step of the brainstorm, the mission, the vision, the values, which we kind of started today, so I'm excited to keep going.
I think I will do independent research and look up some articles and YouTube videos. I know I've got some in my emails already. So making sure I read those and watch those videos so that I'm more prepared for the conversations in the future weeks.
I'm going to be working with Sasha to, like she said, better those mission and values, but also thinking about like the voting process and how we're going to go about like electing a board of directors in the future.
On Rabia?
This is an agenda item for the DE&I committee with the East Dearborn Downtown Development Authority, of which Divine is the chairwoman of. And so that is work that really we've already talked about, but we just have to execute it. And so that's what we will be doing very soon.
Yeah, I think I want to Oh, it's on me, yeah? Okay, yeah. So I think I want to just have a conversation with Patrick about building out our team. It's just the presentation made me think about like gaps that we have and how we can start to sort of build out our governance team. So I want to have that on our agenda for our next meeting and talk about maybe some strategies for that. Sure.
The action I'll take from this point to build on today's learning is I'll continue to come to class, do my homework and readings, and just try to research the pieces that I marked down as need to know more, like the electric companies that use co-ops. I like knowing the history of things and understand how it manifests itself and what are the top line learnings that we could replicate and what are the bad things and just stuff like that. But I think me coming to class will be, a good step.
In agreement with what Dr. Rabia talked about, as well as what Leslie talked about, for me, what keeps standing out is the whole membership structure. What's going to sustain it? And making sure that I'm able to be clear on what authentic buy-in looks like for the membership.
All right, and you can celebrate yourselves. You have completed an Aurid focused conversation on the first half of that presentation. And you have also given me some insight on what is the most meaningful thing to engage in this latter half, which is I'm going to eschew part of my presentation and really focus on just giving you some background on some of the work that I do beyond the Coconut Collaborative Time Bank and some of the other things mentioned in the bio. So I am on the board of the Dill Pickle Food Co-op. I'm the secretary of the board and our owner linkage chair, or the chair of the owner linkage committee, which is about member engagement. This co-op is 15 years old, and this is a co-op in crisis. But we'll come back to that. There's some background to offer there. I also facilitate for Co-op Power, which is a Northeast energy cooperative. And I joined that board as after attending their Climate Justice Summit. One of the members of the board invited me and said, hey, I'd like to bring your facilitation capacity into the board. I think the board could use it in terms of they use Sociocracy in their board structure. And I'll go ahead and define that a little bit further in just a moment. So there's the Dill Pickle Food Co-op board, there's the Co-op Power board, and I also sit on the board of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. But in all of these spaces and in all of these boards, with their different structures, their different governance systems, governance mechanisms, one of the things that has been really key to me, and again, I have a bias because I am a facilitator, is that on each of these boards, there is a strong need for someone to attend to process. And in some of the spaces, it's easier to hand that role off to other people. So in the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, a couple of us are facilitators. And so we can move the facilitation role around and have someone else attend the process and allow someone like me who facilitates a lot, to participate. In other spaces like the Co-op Power Board, fewer people there are facilitators. So they naturally said, hey, we have a thin board. We have a board of about 10 people. They all have, lots of different things that they are managing and that they are engaging. We need an outside facilitator to continually hold process for us, because that's going to be the best way that we're going to be able to attend to the governance decisions that we have to make. So that's one thing that I want to highlight in terms of governance. If you are not going to focus on training facilitation internally, you need to really be sure that as you're thinking about structuring your governance body, that you're looking towards external facilitation. With the Dill Pickle Food Co-op board, we have an external facilitator, which is a member, who volunteers, to facilitate our board meetings. And what that has allowed us to do, again, is to ensure that all members of the board are present to all of the conversation and that they're not caught in managing the process of a meeting. And that's important because, especially when you are in a space like the Dill Pickle Food Co-op Board is right now, we are in a heavy cash crisis. And I won't disclose how heavy the cash crisis is. That's for members to know. But we are in a deep crisis right now, and we require all members of our board to be very focused on what we can do to do development, to raise funds, to ensure that we basically build out our cash flow so that we have a runway for the turnaround plan that we're executing right now. And so it's been one of the most challenging roles that I've had to sit in. I came onto this board 2 years ago, anticipating that I could just make a helpful contribution to the food co-op ecosystem in Chicago. I am a solidarity economy organizer on the southeast of Chicago. I want to make sure that this food co-op thrives. And just as I joined the board in 2019, in 2020, pandemic hit, and then we had a store closure, and then we had a labor unrest. And finally, we're here in 2021, still trying to recover from all of that with this cash crisis. So it's really critical that you think about as you're forming these structures, of governance, as you're forming this board, that you think about what is going to be your process and what is going to be the process that's going to best hold you as a board. The Dill Pickle Food Co-op Board early on, far before I joined the board, decided that we wanted to implement what's called policy governance, which is very common amongst many food cooperatives. Policy governance, something drawn from the nonprofit world, but effectively we have a set of policies that tells our GM, these are the things that we expect of you. These are the things that we will offer to support you as a board. This is the communication that we expect. This is our grand end statement. And basically that policy governance document determines how governance and management relate to one another. So we have a specific D3 policy that we always talk about with our membership, just because we want them to be fully aware of it. And in our D3 policy, which I will highlight for you. So in our D3 policy, we specifically talk about the board delegating authority to the GM through ends and executive limitations, as long as the GM uses a reasonable interpretation of the board's ends and executive limitations policy. The GM can do what they please. They can execute on they can implement whatever plan that they choose, as long as it's a reasonable interpretation of our ends and our executive limitation policies. The board is going to respect and support that GM's policies, as long as those choices, again, are reasonable. And then if we change, the ends or executive limitations, it's only towards the future. We can't govern towards the past. So this is one way that the Dill Pickle Food Co-op has decided how we segregate our governance from our management. We did have a time when we basically relieved the general manager of their responsibility. And for about a 2-year period, the board was heavily involved in some of that operational stuff, and it didn't go well. These were 9 people who had didn't necessarily have grocery experience and didn't have the advisors at the time to draw into that space. So for us, at the Dill Pickle, that experience, and both, my read of that experience as I kind of read the documentation, as the secretary, I get to read all of the minutes and all of the backlogs of annual meetings. Reading that history for me is further highlighting that why in this particular space, and again, this is a food co-op, so you all may be working on other types of co-ops, but when you're thinking about how you're structuring your governance and your management, even if your governance and management are some of the same people, they have to wear different hats at different times. We do have a staff member that can sit on our board. We have a staff seat that can be elected to our board, and that staff member has to come into the board and at various times switch hats, and and be very clear about which way that they're communicating at any given moment. We don't allow them to monitor our GM directly because that's a conflict of interest. They are a staff member that is supervised by the GM. So this is just sort of one way that I want to highlight sort of my experience with that governance and management separation, that governance and management conundrum. And when I talk about the sort of that policy register that guides the co-op, in terms of the remainder of what it does, again, we have a policy register that talks about the end statement. That's the big vision of the store. The executive limitations, that's what we expect of our executive, the board process, and then board and management relationship. So that really talks about that board and board level communication. So we settled on policy governance as part of our policy documents. Now, this is only for the board policies. The GM is allowed to set store policies and set hiring policy, set employee policy, all of that. But the other thing that we set early on was a decision-making methodology. So I think maybe in that presentation that you had earlier, at least in the one that I saw from earlier in 2020, you might have talked about some of the aspects of governance as being related to the legal structure, a decision-making or a governance system, and then a management system. Well, the decision-making system that we chose inside of the dill pickle was consensus. Now, consensus, just being a way of reaching agreement. It's not necessarily unanimity. What we do is that we have discussions around proposals that are on the table, and then we try to integrate objections into those discussions. Other co-ops, in other spaces might use other types of decision-making methods. There's Robert's Rules of Order, which is certainly very common in the world. There's also, I mentioned Sociocracy, which is a consent-based decision-making method, which is if you don't have an objection, the decision moves forward. If there's no one at the table who has an objection, we'll move forward with the decision. There's Holacracy, which is another sort of circle-based or sort of interlinking methodology. But all of these are things that, as you begin to think about how you're doing governance, or how you're doing management, what's the process that you're going about to ensure that the input that you need is coming into the conversation, and that you can that the output that you're putting forward is moving where it needs to go. So the input and output are really important in terms of how you think about your process, how you think about your decision making. And that's why I think good facilitators are really good troubleshooters to have in all of these spaces. So if you don't have someone that's designated for facilitation yet, find someone to support you, or train someone up in your organization that's going to provide the facilitation support. Because when you get to the design of your governance and your management structures, that facilitator is going to be really important for having the conversation around what are the things that everyone at the table needs. If people want to make sure that they are always heard, that their objections are integrated, that'll let you know kind of what type of decision-making system you need to bring in, and how you might use that to reach the decisions you need to make. Let me flip to, so the next thing I want to actually gather input from you on before I share my background on the Co-op Power Board and my relationship there is, what types of co-ops are you all developing? That's something that I did not hear feedback on through the survey, but if someone wants to hop off mute and talk about your co-op just a bit, that would certainly help me frame the next part of my discussion. And feel free to throw a Y in the chat if you just want to express your intent to share more about your co-op.
The co-op that we first came with was Homage to Black Excellence, which is made up of 3 components of programming. However, the one that is at the forefront is a Juneteenth mobility stroll and roll cooperative. So it's based around mobility, equity, and inclusion. We have, from this particular project, we brought together about 15 community partners, as well as sponsorship dollars and community buy-in on this particular programming. And we want to move it forward to where it becomes every year and it's fully funded. One of the tenets is around equity. You heard Dr. Rabia talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And so in building out this cooperative, it's never heard of. And I told Ron earlier today, it's an innovative way, but we're looking to get it structured to where we're able to make sure that we have the proper governance as well as the management base, and a way to make sure that equity and sustainability is at the foundation.
I can go next unless somebody else wants to go. Cool. So me and Patrick, our cooperative is Evaluative, and we do 2 things. We make music and resources to supplement the music, mostly hip hop music, to teach Spanish. And then the second thing is we put together professional development for primarily Spanish teachers, but also other teachers who want to use hip hop to teach.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Let me shift my slide here. All right. So I recognize that we've had maybe legal definitions of what governance is as a part of this, the earlier part of this presentation, but what really are we trying to do together? It's a really, for me, it's a really important and critical question, because when you get to a moment of crisis, like we are at with the dill pickle, you have to know why you're there, right? So we are not governing, governance for us, is not necessarily just the processes and the practices and the sort of legal entity and the structures that are embedded in this in this practice. That is definitely what they are doing. They're serving a purpose, but this comes from Resonance Network, their We Govern initiative, right? Governance really is about how we're choosing to live together, right? How we're choosing to live together, work together, uphold each other's well-being, and you choose to use resources together, right? So that you've talked about that as a sort of aspect of management, build systems and structures that reflect our shared values, choose and care for the land or whatever sort of resources we're holding, which provides everything we need. And it's really important for you to ground in this being the sort of basis for your governance system, because again, when you encounter a situation like the dill pickle is encountering, where there's labor unrest, where workers have felt unheard, and therefore, they begin to unionize or they begin to strike, what is it that is grounding you in terms of why you brought this institution into existence? And what is the conversation that you're going to facilitate to get that back on track? How are you going to recenter everyone inside of this space of shared values? Maybe you can do that in-house, or maybe you need some support outside to do that. But recognizing that is going to strengthen whatever governance system that you build. So again, governance is not just the processes and the practices, but it's really a set of the set of values that you bring to the space and how you continue to ground inside of those values. So I'm not going to do a deep dive in sociocracy, and I'm not going to do a deep dive in facilitation. But I do want to show you some aspects of the board structure at Dill Pickle, just so that you kind of know the structure that is in place there. And you can think about how it might fit or might not fit what you need. So again, this is a food
Excuse me,
co-op.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I've heard you mention the word value on more than one occasion. For me, I don't know about anybody else, but can you give me your definition of what value is?
Yes. So, and I'll specifically kind of couch it as shared values, because these are the purpose, the reason, the aspects of why we are coming together. So why are we trying to hold together this physical store that sells food to Logan Square? What are the reasons that undergird that? So that's what I mean when I talk about values and shared values.
Thank you.
Okay. So, so the governance structure at Dill Pickle, we again are consumer co-op, so we're governed at the very top by our ownership. From our ownership, we elect our board of directors, and our board of directors makes decisions together by consensus, as I mentioned. And it's informed by our owners through the annual meeting process, through owner forums, through owner surveys. Everything that this board does is informed by owners, providing continuous feedback and continual input into the institution. That board of directors manages that general manager, who then supervises the staff. So that's the sort of governance structure of this Dill Pickle entity. The board is broken out into several committees: finance, policy, owner linkage. We've sunsetted our GM, Dev, and Eval committee. And those committees do work between board meetings. So, one of the things that we highlight as part of our board onboarding and our board education, which I think you all may have talked about earlier, really critical, board onboarding and education. And when board members come on, we're very clear about the time commitment, and we're very clear about our expectations that we're serving in one of these committee structures. And we also have really been lifting up that, hey, we have an education partner, so we're expecting the board members, on a bi-monthly basis are committing to complete educational modules of some sort. No surprise, I do a lot of facilitation modules. But the importance of this structure is that we are slotting our board members into specific areas of work of their choosing. But we're also saying we want to build and bolster you up in this process, and actually enhance the structure by enhancing the people who are part of the structure. And so you probably covered this already in terms of what board responsibilities is, but this is kind of drilling down into a specific cooperative. We're monitoring and evaluating the performance of our general manager. We're overseeing the high-level financial picture. We're doing strategic planning through either our annual retreat or through our mid-year retreats. We're building community relationships through things like our owner linkage committee, where I host owner forums, host owner trivia nights, help to design the annual meeting process and the annual election. We're fundraising through grants, loans, and events, and we're keeping engaged through owners through all of these various communication outlets, because the cooperative does not exist if its members become disengaged. This is our end statement. So when we talk about those shared values, again, 15 years ago, some of the owners of the Dill Pickle who set the bylaws in place designed a set of ends that were the shared values that informed the basis of the store. And those shared values were 3 in number: the equitable economic relationships, positive environmental impacts, and inclusive practices grounded in cooperative values. Not necessarily fun fact, but you actually find a lot of cooperatives that have these exact same end statements because they are in a box of policy governance, documents that Colluminate hands out. But that doesn't mean that you have to use them. So this is where the dill pickle grounded as being like the basis for our formation. And then I talked about we're setting expectations for our directors. We're expecting that they're attending our board meetings, they're working within a committee, they're communicating over email and Slack, they're participating in board education. So all of these things are things that we're saying, hey, you are holding together like a part of this store. And so we expect you to show up for that if you're asking for that commitment. You've probably also covered that sort of fiduciary responsibility for directors. So, we talk to our directors in the onboarding process about their duty of care, attending the board meetings and being prepared, giving voice to their perspective, their duty of loyalty, acting on behalf of the cooperative in the best interest, disclosing any conflicts of interest and not competing with the co-op and not breaching confidentiality. And I've already talked a little bit about the policy governance, but again, we set expectations for our GM, we write them down, we assign that authority, and then we check monthly, we do monitoring monthly on these policy documents to see, are you meeting the numbers? Like, if it's a sales number, if it's a product selection number, are you actually hitting those targets? And those are how we are actually monitoring our GM. And that's specifically to this particular institution. I've talked about that policy register, so I won't recover that. I've talked about that D3 policy, so I won't revisit that. As the secretary, I maintain the annual calendar and our work plan. So, again, the board, just like management, has a work plan. It has, this is what we need to monitor each month. Because if you don't develop that work plan, then effectively you can get stacked up. And we have this really massive like B1 policy, which is our budget and planning policy. And if we don't calendar that 4 times a year, then that policy can really eat up a lot of the GM's time. So we focus on saying, hey, we need to know from you, GM, when's the best place to actually for you to do these budget and planning monitoring documents. So that's a way that we manage our work, in that annual calendar. Foundational documents, bylaws. I won't cover that in depth, but effectively, legal standard, legal document, bylaws lets you know lots of information about how the organization is formed. And it's a really critical document for you to refer back to make sure that you are actually operating the institution according to law. Talked about our consensus decision-making. And then finally, look, if you're gonna have people serving on the board, do something to incentivize that support. You don't necessarily have to give a monetary gift. You don't have to give a gift card, but some way you want to actually make sure that this is a rewarding experience, both on an educational side, but in other ways, right? If it's a soul deadening experience to serve on the board, then no one will want to do it, and if no one wants to do it, that's the withering of your institution, because the board needs to be there, and the board actually needs to show up in full, right? Your full attention at those meetings. And so I'll pause there just on that sort of governance side, and I won't. Ron, did you go into the School for Democratic Management material just so that I don't actually touch upon that?
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Okay. All right. Let's see where my time is. 6:31. Okay. So then I'll do a little bit on the management side. This is something that has been a little bit more theoretical for me. So I haven't actually worked in formations where this particular structure is in place. Both Co-op Power and the Dill Pickle Food Co-op are not necessarily democratically managed workplaces, right? They still have the management side still has some level of hierarchy in it. But it is it is something that we've presented to our general manager and said, after we get through this crisis, please look at these documents. We want democratic workplace management here because we want employees to feel that their voice is heard, whether or not they kind of continue with their sort of the unionization. So the piece on the democratic workplace, and part of this was covered during the earlier presentation, but democratic workplaces this is from the School of Democratic Management, shares money, information, and power with people who work in the company. So this is, again, on the management, on the operation side, this is where we get to the democratic workplace. And the School for Democratic Management talks about 4 corner posts as being how a democratic workplace is constructed. So they're the money, the information, the power, and the people. In terms of money, the regular financial returns. So however your co-op is constructed, part of the co-op is supposed to be the sort of economic incentive or the economic participation. That is one of our co-op principles. And that financial incentive incentivizes people kind of developing an ownership analysis and an ownership thinking. The Dill Pickle Food Co-op has not necessarily had a patronage dividend sent out to members over the course of this 15 years. But we have always had member discount days. So we have quarterly member discount days, and that's the way that we do our economic participation. But that's slightly different in terms of thinking about democratic workplace. But what's the financial incentive for folks in the workplace? Worker owners, and this is again, speaking about a worker-owned cooperative, choose how to reinvest profits. And there's a pathway to ownership that exists for the majority. Again, the Dill Pickle is not necessarily a worker co-op, but we have actually been, as a board, developing and thinking through the policy for how we could automatically offer an ownership opportunity basically in the store to workers as they join after maybe a year of service or so many hours. But effectively in the democratic workplace, pathway to ownership exists for the majority of those employed. A democratic workplace shares information, so managerial knowledge. Do you have a way that the strategy for the business is actually being communicated out? Is there financial literacy that's offered so that you can do financial transparency in a real way? And do you have open book systems that really do the teaching and the engagement around this material, around this sharing? So that's one other aspect of this this democratic workplace. And what I'll offer as a sort of analysis to this is that I currently work as a program manager for Open Collective Foundation, which is effectively an open workplace. And what I mean by that is that when I joined Open Collective Foundation, they said, you have a title and you have a couple of things that we thought we were hiring for, but what is it that you want to do? And and we'll kind of back your play. If you decide what you want to do, we'll back your play. But one of the folks that joined at the same time as me, and this is also a place that has a very transparent bookkeeping system through a platform called Open Collective. But one of the folks who joined at the same time as me said, hey, you can't talk about having transparent books if you don't tell people like what these line items are. Like there's no way for us to interpret these line items. And there's so many line items that it's not really sharing finances if you're not actually telling people how to interpret the information. So that's the important part of that sharing managerial knowledge. Sharing power. So a governing board pursues member goals. And in this instance, when we're talking about a worker-owned cooperative, maybe that governing board is a smaller subset of workers, or maybe it's like Mandela Grocery Cooperative, which has 13 employees, and all of them, form the governing body or the governing board. But that governing board pursues those member goals. The rights are balanced with responsibilities. The decision-making roles are clearly defined, which is a really important one. And I think Mandela provides a really good case for this in that Mandela used to be a worker collective that was all self-managed. Recently, Mandela Grocery decided we want to hire a general manager. And the way that they got to that decision is that, I mean, several of the folks that were in the employ of worker or the worker owners there said, I've come into this workplace. I don't necessarily always know what to do. I don't know what my roles are, kind of like Open Collective. And, and since I don't have anyone telling me what the priorities are, I'm just kind of doing anything, just picking stuff up and putting stuff down. So they said, hey, we really need a general manager to help us with accountability, because also maybe there were folks who weren't attending meetings, or maybe there were folks, if you needed to check on someone. So they hired a general manager. Like they found someone externally who had, recently closed a juice bar in the neighborhood, and they said, like, hey, would you come in and be our general manager? And that person, Anj Tali, came in and said, like, well, hey, we don't need a management in the form of a person. You kind of just need a management function, and anybody can wear that hat. So in developing, and this came out as part of the School for Democratic Management presentation or webinar, they developed a management function that said, hey, if we need to check on someone who's late, like, and we need to see what's going on in their life, that's what a management function can do. If we need to have someone like kind of take a walk and just check into like work performance, that's what the management function can do. But we don't necessarily need to have that always be one person. So so that's an innovation, right? They decided what their decision-making roles were going to be, and they said, allocate this to that person.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So in terms of the current iteration, is it that there's like 10, just hypothetically speaking, there's 10 management functions and they're shared among like different people, or there's still one person that holds that, but it rotates?
The person that holds the management function really holds maybe they're holding like 2 or 3 roles, right? They're holding like accountability, and mostly they're holding an accountability function, right? The other things that we anticipate that management might do, which is like to set departmental priorities, no, that's actually happening at the board level. At the entire collective like sets what's the priorities and what's the strategy for the store. And then, the management function just says, hey, like, you guys said that these were your goals, these were your targets, like something's missing here, what do we need to do? So that's the main function of the management in that role.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, and then people. So the development of leaders, like, meaningful participation requires training, supervision models cooperative principles. Back to Mandela, right? They develop a supervisory model that models their cooperative principles. They're developing leadership amongst everyone who's on the floor, everyone who's in the store. And people need support with communication and conflict, which again, conflict is a primary function of management. If there's conflict in the store, the conflict and accountability piece sits with that management function. The manager can kind of go out and address the conflict, see if what needs to happen there. But again, these are the elements of the democratic workplace, and these are the things that you would want to show up if you want to build workplace democracy in a meaningful, deep, and rich way. And I'm not going to do that particular poll, but I'll pause and see, are you all thinking about cooperatives that will have a democratic workplace component? Or what are the sort of management structures that you all are thinking about implementing in the co-ops you're building as we wind down near the close of the hour?
I think one of our goals should be having democratic management, because when I think about it, it just falls in line. Like when you were talking about the unionization of the workers at Dill Pickle, I was thinking in my head, I was a little bit surprised because I know co-ops and unions kind of share like a similar historical ties. And I was like, shouldn't the workers at a co-op, isn't the whole point of a co-op to lift each other's up? So shouldn't the workers also be involved in that? Doesn't that make sense? And to put members above workers, doesn't that kind of invalidate the whole one person, one vote? And something that we already have in place is called like a sweat equity membership, where people who are like volunteering their hours, whether they're, yeah, if they're getting paid to do it, it's not really volunteering. But if they're putting the time in, then they can use that as a membership. And I think that all employees should be allowed membership through that avenue.
Any other potential democratic workplaces out there? Okay. And I certainly agree with you, Sienna. You know, and that's the importance of like thinking. Those, you know, I definitely agree in terms of yeah, the union and the co-op go together. I couldn't actually say that on the legal end because we're in the bargaining table right now, but you know, effectively, you have to think about all of that from the outset because Dill Pickle made a commitment 15 years ago to a set of bylaws that said, this is the membership, this is what membership means in this co-op. And in order to change that, we've got to get, you know, I mean, a quorum of some 3,000 members to the table at an annual meeting to actually affect and amend the bylaws to put a different membership tier in. So if the Dill Pickle had thought 15 years ago that maybe we should actually create a workplace where there's a worker owner tier already built into the bylaws, we might not be at this impasse at the moment, right? You know, and so that's the importance of those founding documents, you know, those bylaws, those policy registers, and other sort of policies. All of those things are things that you want to have a consistent and constant review of. We review our policy, basically when we're doing policy monitoring in the Dill Pickle, we're basically looking at the policy and saying, is this still a good policy? What's broken in this policy? And one of the things that we found this year, as we entered into this sort of, you know, pandemic period and then, you know, and labor unrest, is that we didn't have a workplace conflict policy there, right? It didn't exist. It wasn't something that anyone thought would ever happen. So you can't predict the future, but you can in the present, like look down the road and say, what are the things that we're missing in our policies? And can we fix them? Can we address those gaps? So that when we get to that situation, we have a way forward. We have a way to kind of you know, engage whatever problem we're predicting is coming.
Yeah, Mike, I have a question. Is there ever a point when you're looking at governance that one takes into consideration culture?
Yes. Yeah. And that's so. The story there is that we had a previous GM at this store who was very heavy-handed, you know, who basically had been running the store since its inception. But you know, a lot of the decision making was just held within, again, that one management function, right? We've, you know, since we moved that GM, we went out and sourced another GM. We found someone within the co-op ecosystem. They came from Davis Food Co-op. They had other sort of co-op experience. And so it's definitely been a transformation of our store culture to bring this person in and to have a very different management style. Hasn't always been, you know, hasn't always gone over well. And so it is really important. It is really critical that you begin thinking about, you know, culture, that you begin, you know, building on the type of culture that you want to see. And for me, you know, again, back to that facilitation, some of these decision-making methods, you know, consensus, sociocracy, you know, holacracy, some of them have ways that just by the facilitation. So what we did earlier, when I kind of when I moved you around and gave you a speaking order, in Sociocracy, that's part of my meetings with Co-op Power. Like everyone is expected to kind of, have space to speak, and we really slow down the meeting so that we can ensure that every voice is heard. That's a really small element that reinforces a type of culture that you want to show up in the cooperative. And so when you're thinking about what structures you put in place for decision-making, for governance, those are things to think about, because those things will inform, for better or for worse, your culture. So.
Thank you. Well, it's 7:57. We're a few minutes away from concluding for the evening. Mike, I just want to again extend my thanks and appreciation for you to coming in and sharing your knowledge and your practice with us. And I'm looking forward to convening with you after here and learning more about the work that you're doing there in Chicago.
Absolutely, likewise.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share a link here in the chat. This is, so all of the stuff that I didn't cover, like I said, I am not necessarily a governance or management expert, but I am a deep researcher, right? And so that's just a canvas of materials. Maybe you've seen some of them, maybe you haven't, but those are just a set of materials that you might just kind of want to dig through. That will talk further about, the governance and management. I did find that video from earlier in 2020 that the network did. So I just dropped that in there too. But just a resource for you to dig into afterwards and continue thinking about these structures.
Mike, I want to say this is very educational and informative, and I really appreciate you exposing me to the Aurid concept. I really like how it centered everyone to be forced in a comfortable, safe space to have their voices heard. So thank you.
Very welcome. Technology of participation, I highly endorse it if you're really interested in facilitation.
Okay. Am I still here?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I went to copy in the chat box and it took me to your Dropbox.
Yes, there's a Dropbox paper document. So I really like using that tool because I can put rich resources in there. So.
Well, thank you. Well, it's been a great 2-day start of the finish up of the first week. Mike, we have 5 more weeks to go, and I'm glad to hear from your initial wheel what folks are sharing about what they've got out of it, not just today's discussion, but also yesterday's discussion as well. So that's encouraging for us as the facilitators of the Academy. So folks, it's Thursday and the weekend is upon us. We want to send Mike off with the spirit of love and gratitude for sharing his knowledge and time with us. Because time, I've always valued time. And so, Mike, thank you again. Can't say enough for what you brought to it. And we have 5 more weeks to go. So if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to be curious enough to say, Mike, go on and enjoy your weekend. I'm due a visit to Chicago. I'm hoping I'm coming up there this summer. I know Renee Hatcher is coming here to Baltimore, and Mike, I don't know if we shared with you the information around our upcoming conference in September. Yeah, so that's one of the things I'd like to talk to you about as well. All right.
Look forward to it, and I bid you all well. Very good luck in your efforts, and yeah, look forward to seeing you all in the co-op world.
Thank you, Mike. All right, folks. We're going to sign off for this evening. I'll see all of you in the space next week. Expect to get handouts through your emails before probably around Monday when Kimberly gets back in the room. If there's anything that you need of us, feel free to email me. I'll be out this weekend celebrating my birthday though, so don't expect any quick responses. Thank you. So
Happy
Ashay,
birthday.
thank you. Ashay, and travel well and travel in peace, folks. I'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you. Happy birthday. Have a great
Thank
weekend.
Thank you.